Gush Etzion here, Israel Uncensored on the Land of Israel Network at thelandofisrael.com. It is Monday, April 27th, 2020, the 3rd of ER 5780. And this is an extremely special and also moving time here in the Land of Israel. We just had Yom HaShoah last week, commemorating the 6 million plus Jews murdered at the hands of the Nazis in the Holocaust. And without much turnaround time, here we are just a week later, back-to-back Yom HaZikaron Memorial Day here in Israel, followed by Independence Day, going from the absolute lows with over, I think the official number here, 23,816 Israeli servicemen killed in defense of the state of Israel, all the way back from 1870 until now. At the same time, and then, of course, by the way, Yom Ha'atzmaut, Independence Day, the next day, where we celebrate, which is, for many people here, the highlight of the year. This year, of course, a little bit different because of the corona restrictions. Everybody encouraged to stay at home. There actually is a closure on all of our communities, which we'll talk about later on in the show. But I want to focus now on Yom HaZikaron, Memorial Day. We're going to get to a very special guest now here in just a minute. Her name is Adena Mark Kapon. She's a top-notch party planner who lives in Efrat. And in May of 2001, her mother, Sara Blaustein, of blessed memory, 53 years old, of Efrat, was killed in a drive-by shooting, was murdered in a drive-by shooting on the road from Jerusalem to Gush Etzion, just north of Neve Daniel. Esther Alvan, another a 20-year-old, was also killed in that attack. So not only do we remember those who fell in defense of the state of Israel, we also remember on this day those who were murdered in the terror attacks, which go back, people think that they started, I don't know, in 1967 or whatnot, but we've been under the threat of terror for over 100 years here in Israel, so we remember those who lost their lives in attacks. So Adena Mark Kapon, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us here on Israel Uncensored on the Land of Israel Network.
Thank you, too. Thank you for having me.
Tell me, if you can, your memories of the incident in which your mother was murdered back in 2001.
On May 29th, 2001, here in Israel was the day after Shavuot. In New York, where I was living at the time, it was the second day of Shavuot. And so we had to be contacted. It was, for us, it was a holiday, and we were in synagogue as a family, and we had to be contacted, and it was kind of a whole story, who's going to answer the phone, how are we going to find them, how are we going to get to them, and of course they wound up finding us and getting to us, and giving us the news. Within minutes of getting the news of what happened to my mother, there were reporters and press at the door, rabbis from across the neighborhood. I lived in the 5 towns, and so there was a lot of shuls, a lot of communities and rabbis who all came over, neighbors and friends. Everyone heard about it somehow, even though it was still Shavuot. And within those hours, lots of phone calls and a lot of, I would say, like swirling memories in my brain that aren't so clear, but somehow tickets were purchased, reservations were made, and all kinds of arrangements were made, and we got into a plane. It was my then husband. I took my 6-month-old baby that I was nursing. I left 3 other children at home. One of my brothers who was with me, and we got in the car. And when we got to the airport, waiting for us there was my aunt, my mother's sister, and actually one of my cousins, and we all flew together for the funeral, and we stayed for the shiva and plus.
And from what I understand, you had other siblings, or I'm not sure if siblings or step siblings were in the car at the time as well.
So my brother, a different brother of mine who lived in New York, but he came to visit my mom for Shavuot, so he was with her in the car. And our little sister, at the time, she was 12. She didn't go. She didn't go in the car. She waited at home. So when we landed in Israel, when we got there, waiting for us was my mother's brother, was my brother, my sister, my grandmother, my grandmother who buried her daughter, and they waited for us. My mother was killed in the morning hours of May 29th. They waited for us to arrive in Israel for the funeral. So it was a nighttime funeral.
Tell me if you can, and I don't want this to sound like an insensitive question, God forbid, but tell me if you can put into words in any way. I mean, the impact of that event, if you can remember back to 2001, and how it has had an impact or an effect on you, till this day. We're now 19 years approximately later.
Well, that's a whole. That's a lot of. There's a lot to that answer. The effect of something like this is it's life changing. It's life altering. For each person involved. And, like I said, I'm the oldest of 3 younger siblings. I had 2 single brothers at the time, a sister who was 12 years old. My grandmother, who's since passed away, was and who had to bury her daughter, my mom, and of course my mother's other 2 siblings. So everyone's affected differently. Oh, and my mother's husband, he was in the car and he was injured. So everyone's affected differently. Everyone's affected somehow in some way. And I'll tell you the truth, as anyone can tell you who's experienced any sort of trauma, but certainly a traumatic death. Sometimes you don't know that the effects right away. Sometimes it takes years for the effects to happen. At this point, 19 years later, I really believe, and I like to think that there's a lot of good that came out of it. It's a hard thing to say, and I think it's a hard thing to hear. The first time someone told me that was Sherry Mandel, the mother of Kobe Mandel, who was murdered only a few months earlier before my mother. Him and Yosef Ishran were murdered right around Lag BaOmer. So it was only like 6 weeks, I think, before my mother, which was on Shavuot. And Sherry, who lost her son in such a brutal, tragic terror attack, said to me, so many good things came out of it. And I wasn't ready to hear it at the time. But because it came from her, I wanted to understand it. And so I let it sink in and I thought about it. And it took me a long time. It took me a lot of years. And I don't know if everyone agrees with me. I'm sure there are everyone, has their own experiences and their own feelings. So maybe a lot of people won't agree with me, but I do. I see goodness. I see the what my kids like to call butterfly effect. Our Aliyah to Israel was in response to my mother's murder. Subsequently, many other family members, cousins of mine, aunts and uncles, and you can call them distant family, but we're very close. So they also made Aliyah in response. Wonderful, projects in her memory and her name. A lot of beautiful things that happened from it, and we wouldn't trade that for having her back for old world. But how it affected us is really only for the best, for the good.
Wow, it's amazing. You're focusing on the good, despite that horrible tragedy. And here we are now, just on the eve of Yom HaZikaron, which what I remember Yom HaZikaron always as focused on the soldiers, and now, unfortunately, as a result of our reality, now it's also focused on the terror, those who were murdered in terror attacks as well. What do you personally normally do, leading up to Yom HaZikaron or on the day itself, and how is it going to be different this year with all the corona-related restrictions? Right.
So from my personal comfort comes from being surrounded by my family. It's somewhat of a cliche, but all cliches come from a place of truth, right? We feel that loss every day. There's not a day that goes by that my mother isn't missing, to me as a mother, to my children as a grandmother. So many years have passed, and so many wonderful occasions and beautiful, monumental events that she's missed. She's not there, and we feel that all the time. And I see Yom HaZikaron as a time where I welcome the rest of our nation to join me in remembering. I don't expect everyone to remember my mother every day. It's not their mother. But it's a welcome invitation, if if I can say that, to say to everyone, thank you so much for also having this day and remembering her, honoring her, all of the victims, all of the soldiers and all the terror victims. Today is the day that the families are comforted by you, comforted by your remembering and by your honoring them, because we have a pretty bleak hole that was left behind on a daily basis. So generally, when you ask what I normally do, I like having my family around me. For many years, I didn't go to the cemetery at the time of the ceremony, the national ceremony, where throngs and throngs and thousands of people were there. I didn't like that. I like to go alone. I would get there really early, like at 7 in the morning. In fact, the cleaners were there washing down the graves. I found that very moving. I liked watching the cleaners washing down the graves of all the victims on Remembrance Day, and leaving in Israel. What they do is they leave flags tied with a black ribbon. And I liked watching that. I liked being there really early watching that. And I liked my time alone. There was one year that I actually I parked my car at the place where she was killed, at the exact spot on the road, on a highway. It's a major highway, as you know, on Highway 60 here in the Gush. And that's where I wanted to be for the siren. So it kind of like changed throughout the years, different years, and where I was psychologically and mentally of what I like to do. But for the most part, I really like to be surrounded by my family. And I don't want to say the word enjoy, but I enjoy people's words of comfort and support. And it's nice. It's comforting.
So I guess in this year would be perhaps no different, being surrounded by your family, I guess, with the corona and that reality.
Yeah, so like I said, a lot of years I didn't like to be there for the tekes, and then there were a lot of years that I did for the ceremony at the gravesite, and then a lot of years I did, and I enjoyed again the people coming over to me and asking, "Can you please tell us about your mother? Who was she?" And honoring her at her gravesite. So there were a lot of years that I did appreciate that, and this year we're gonna go today. We're gonna go today before we get locked down. Hopefully there'll be a flag with a black ribbon already on it, because I don't know, that gives me some sort of comfort. Another thing that I find comfort in, or maybe I'm giving comfort, is the young woman who was murdered in the same terror attack with my mother. She was a Trumpist, a hitchhiker who was in the car, and she was also murdered. Well, she's buried right next to her. They're buried right next to each other. And so when I see her parents every year, her mother and I, and we hug and we stand together and we hold hands, and I think we both give each other a lot of comfort. So I'll miss that this year. I called her this morning to tell her that I'll miss her, and she's a much older woman, and I was kind of worried about her being alone on Yom HaZikaron, but she said she won't be alone, and I hope she'll be okay, even though I'm not there next to her.
Very, very moving, no doubt. It's hard to put it into words, and I'm sure it is for many, many people. I mean, you did a great job expressing what you're doing this year, and your thoughts. Just one last question: as we are talking right now, I literally hear outside my window the IAF, the Israel Air Force planes going by, preparing for Independence Day, which is the day after Memorial Day. This year also it'll be a little bit different. Instead of flying throughout the whole country, they're going to focus on flying over hospitals and really acknowledging the medical personnel throughout the country who are literally on the front lines risking their lives to try to help those with the coronavirus and help everyone here in Israel. So just if you can, last question, talk about that transition from Memorial Day, from mourning the loss of your mother on Memorial Day, and just a few hours later, the flags are raised and people are partying. It's like one of the happiest days, if not the happiest day of the year in Israel. If you can, just
Right.
describe to
So
the audience the transition.
I'll tell you, my mother was the inspiration that my mother can offer to everyone in her story, and the story of her life and the story of her death, is that she loved this country. She was such a Zionist. She really fulfilled her dream, and she was killed only 9 months after her Aliyah. She fulfilled a dream of a lifetime, and she didn't even get a year. She didn't even get a full cycle. And I think even if she knew that, she still would have done it. Meaning, like, she just really wanted to live here, and she really wanted to come. And it's a really inspiring story. And Yom HaAtzmaut, like, I grew up in New York with my mother, who would, like, serve us blue and white cookies on Yom HaAtzmaut at home. No one did that. Like, she just always had it in her. There was every little touch that she could do to connect us to Israel and loving Israel, she did. And so the transition for me to Yom HaAtzmaut is like even an additional kind of memorializing my mother and following in her footsteps and what she would have wanted. And I understand for some people that's not so easy, and I understand it and I know it. For me, it's an okay transition. It's a happy way of memorializing her.
Pretty amazing. That was very, very moving, and I just wish the best for you, your entire family, all of Israel, as we go through this process. And as you said, you welcome the rest of the nation into what you're experiencing, and I believe that you are upholding that. And I know unfortunately, so many people have to go through it and are doing the same. But I want to thank you so much for your time, Adena Mark Kapon, who's, by the way, a top-notch party planner. So if you want information on how to...
One day we're going to start having parties again. One day
Please
soon
God.
after Corona.
After Corona, we'll start having parties. It's called, what is it, A to Z party planning? A to Z?
A to Z Events Israel.
A to Z Events Israel. Okay,
Yeah.
Hopefully we can do another show and just focus on that and the smachot and the happy times.
Thank you, Josh.
Wish you the best.
Thank
in
you,
memory
Josh.
of your mother,
Thank you.
Sara Blaustein, Hashem Yikam Dama, and all the others who died in defense of the state of Israel and who died at the hands of our enemies, which we are commemorating starting this evening. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank
and
you
rock the
so much.
smachot. All the best.
Amen.
Take
Amen.
care. Bye-bye.
This week, Jeremy Gimpel with a special important message on the final return of Israel.
Every individual has divine providence in their life because Abraham was just one man. He was one family, and the Jewish people are an extension of just this one promise given to one man. And as his destiny unfolds through us, the world sees that everyone has a destiny.
For the full show, click on Jeremy Gimpel on the Land of Israel Network at thelandofisrael.com.
And we are back. Josh Hasten here, Israel Uncensored, on the Land of Israel Network at thelandofisrael.com for Monday, the 27th of April, 2020, the 3rd of ER 5780, on the eve of Memorial Day, Yom HaZikaron, here in Israel. Thanks again to Adena Mark Kapon on coming on the show and sharing the story of her mother, Sara Blaustein, who was murdered on the road from Jerusalem to Gush Etzion back in 2001. Oh man, that was difficult, folks. It doesn't get any easier talking to the families of victims of terror or families who lost loved ones, soldiers throughout Israel's turbulent history. But as Adina said at the end, her mother was the ultimate Zionist and loved the state of Israel. Unfortunately, only lived here for 9 months before she was murdered, and a lot of the family making Aliyah, coming home to Israel in response, which is truly inspiring and unbelievable. If you missed any of that interview, go back and check it out, part 1 of the show. Again, as we head towards Memorial Day this evening, the Times of Israel points out that 42 soldiers and civilians were killed since last Memorial Day, bringing the the total number since I think I said 1870, I meant 1860, to 23,816 men and women, and those who were killed defending the state of Israel and its citizens. In total, 75 names were added to the roster of those who died defending the country. I mentioned 42 IDF soldiers, also police officers, civilians, those killed in terror attacks. 33 were disabled veterans who passed away due to complications from injuries sustained during their service. This reported by Times of Israel. We will start Memorial Day, Yom HaZikaron, this evening with a 1-minute siren at 8 p.m. and then a 2-minute siren tomorrow morning at 11 a.m., I believe, starting the official launch of the ceremony tomorrow. As perhaps never before, the cemeteries will, I guess, unofficially be closed tomorrow. Families were encouraged to go visit the graves of their loved ones today, as Adina mentioned also, but police will not physically enforce the order banning bereaved families from coming into a cemetery. But the point is here that they want to prevent any, God forbid, spread of the virus through major gatherings. In normal circumstances, in normal years, there are about 1 million Israelis who descend upon the cemeteries on Memorial Day, Yom HaZikaron, every year. This year will be different. And again, then you have that transition. And if you haven't been in Israel for the transition, I'm sure I've talked about it in years past on my show, there is nothing like that emotional transition from Memorial Day to Independence Day. Just, it's a matter of minutes when the flags are raised and you go from extreme sadness and mourning to happiness, celebrating our Independence Day with barbecues. And again, this year it'll be different. Everybody should be staying at home, and there'll be a lockdown, a curfew, which will begin at 5 p.m. in the afternoon, 5 p.m. Israel time, tomorrow, Tuesday, and end on Wednesday evening after Independence Day. So it'll be a Yom HaZikaron, Yom HaAtzmaut like never before. And I encourage everyone just to follow, as hard as it might be, to follow the rules. Follow the rules as a result of what is going on and the result of our reality. Reported here by the Jewish press, speaking of corona, Israel's health ministry reported this morning the number of corona deaths has risen to 203. One man died of the virus overnight, and another person died this morning, unfortunately. The number of patients in Israel has risen by 23 since yesterday. This is apparently the fewest daily reported cases since March 20th. I pray to God that means we're doing something right here, that we're on the right path. 15,466 infected currently with the virus in Israel, 6,796 recovered. Please God, we're doing something right. Even though, and again, I don't know. I'm not a doctor. I don't know if this is the right strategy, the wrong strategy. Here, Times of Israel reports that the government has lifted, again, this doesn't include Independence Day where there's a total closure, but further restrictions have been lifted as of Friday, gradually reopening Israel's economy. Shopping malls still closed, restaurants still closed, but you can get takeaway now. You can go to the beauty salons, hairdressers, other stores are opened. As of Thursday, I believe they are lifting nearly almost all restrictions on sporting activities. In other words, up until now, you've only been able to go 500 meters from your house, about 500 yards, if you want to carry out any type of athletic activities. Now, it looks like perhaps I'll be able to get back on the bike on Thursday and do a little riding through the hills of Gush Etzion, of course, maintaining the 2-meter rule, staying 2 meters away from the closest person. But things are starting to open up here in Israel, and please God, this is the right decision, and it won't lead to any type of spreading of the virus. I'm being extremely optimistic. I hope that's the case. Israel National News reports the Syrian government, on a different topic here, reported a so-called hostile Israeli attack on targets in southern Damascus early this morning, just hours after Israeli Defense Minister Naftali Bennett hinted at an upcoming military operation. Speaking at a press conference yesterday, Bennett alluded to an operation against Iranian forces stationed in Syria, saying, "Keep your ears open to what you see and hear." Just hours later, Syria's media reported that Israeli aircraft were spotted in Lebanese airspace and had fired missiles on targets in the southern Damascus area at 4:55 a.m. this morning. This is a story in progress, but it looks like that Corona is not going to stop Israel from targeting those who seek our destruction, and we certainly should not take any break in doing that. The Jerusalem Post this morning says that Israel will be able to apply its laws to what they call the West Bank and Judea and Samaria in a couple of months, following a pledge from U.S. Donald Trump. That is based on comments Prime Minister Netanyahu made on Sunday at an online conference of pro-Israel Christians, which marked the centennial of the San Remo conference that recognized Jews' right to self-determination in the historic homeland of Israel. And by the way, I'm going to be writing about that here shortly for JNS News. There was actually a conference yesterday by Im Tirtzu and several other organizations who sponsored the event, which talked about the importance of San Remo, marking the 100th anniversary of that conference, which essentially made the establishment of the Jewish state legal under international law, which, by the way, included at that time Judea and Samaria. And that is what I've been telling people, groups that I speak with, people that I talk to, that is the last legal, internationally recognized decision about what should happen to this area, namely the establishment of a Jewish state in all of the land of Israel. At that time, it was even what is known as Jordan today. That was originally supposed to be a homeland for the Jewish people. And then slowly, Great Britain and the UN started slicing away the map. But if you talk about international law, people say, oh, the so-called settlements, the communities in Judea and Samaria are illegal under international law. Well, go back to the San Remo Conference and the League of Nations decision. That is the last legally binding decision on this area of Judea and Samaria, which put it clearly as part of the Jewish homeland of the State of Israel. Back to the article, the coalition agreement between Likud and Blue and White signed last week states that annexation can be brought to a vote in the cabinet, the Knesset, on July the 1st, at the earliest. Of course, France threatened at the UN Security Council on Thursday such a move would not pass unchallenged and shall not be overlooked in our relationship with Israel. So threats from France, Europe once again, it's not just France, other countries also, threatening to who knows what against the Jewish state of Israel, okay? Instead of worrying about corona in their countries and fighting the virus, the obsession continues against communities of Judea and Samaria, especially by the European Union. Nothing has changed. Nothing has changed at all. The attitude hasn't changed, whether we're talking about 1940s or today. Israel, the Jews, put under a microscope. Back then it was worse, obviously. Put under a microscope. Instead of worrying about their own citizens, they're more concerned. I'm telling you, it's an obsession. They're more concerned about what's going on here in the land of Israel, and the Jews returning to Judea, where we have been for 3,000 years. So the obsession continues. Also reported by the J-Post, Israel's population has hit almost 9.2 million people ahead of Independence Day, reported by the Central Bureau of Statistics. That's an increase of 171,000 persons over the last 12 months, amounting to a population growth rate of 1.9%. By 2030, Israel's population is expected to hit 11.1 million, 13.2 million by 2040, 15.2 million by 2048, which will be Israel's 100th anniversary. Good news. good news. The Jews are alive and well and kicking and growing and thriving here in Israel. 45% of the global Jewish population lives in Israel. Let's get that number up to 50. Israel right now has the most Jews living here right now. In other words, the highest number, the actual number of Jews based on per country, Israel is number one. But if you add up all the other countries together, they make up about 55% of the world Jewish community. Israel at 45%. Let's get that number up to more than 50, and let's see what happens. Many other things going on now here in Israel, and of course, Corona on our minds, Memorial Day, Independence Day, all that taking place simultaneously. As I said before, there really is nothing like it in the world. Commemorating Yom HaZikaron, Memorial Day, and then moving on to Independence Day. This year, like never before, celebrating at home. Nonetheless, to everyone out there listening to the show, may you have a meaningful Yom HaZikaron, Memorial Day, where we remember all of those who gave their lives so that we could be here as a free people, as a free Jewish nation in our homeland. And then, of course, wishing everyone a joyous Yom HaAtzmaut at home. Celebrate at home. Get out the barbecue. Get some beers out. Have a great time celebrating 72 years to the modern state of Israel. Let's not forget how far back we go, 3,000 plus years. I want to give a shout out to Benjamin Bresky for all the work he does behind the scenes, as well as Tabitha Epstein. My name is Josh Hasten. Get in touch with me during the week, josh@thelandofisrael.com on Facebook, Joshua Hasten, or my page, Josh Hasten Israel Advocacy and Journalism, on Twitter at Josh Hasten, and on Instagram as well. Most importantly, now more than ever, everyone out there in the wonderful world of ours, be safe. Shalom, shalom from the hills of Judea. Have a great week, everybody.
This is Eve Harrow for the Land of Israel Network. You can start every week with me, hearing views and interviews with fascinating people, some well-known, others homegrown, about places I guide, ideas I have to get you thinking too. It's about the land. It's about my people. It's about our collective journey. Rejuvenation with Eve Harrow, Sundays on the Land of Israel Network.